New York has a talent for pretending to be fine. It will fix its hair in a storefront reflection and tell you it slept great. It will serve breakfast on time and quietly change the locks. After the courtyard, the city decided to be fine with extra enthusiasm. Schedules were kept, papers were delivered, dogs performed their civic duty on hydrants. But if you stood still long enough, you could feel it block long inhale that hadn't been exhaled yet. Joe and Mary's opened on time. The sign in the window declared lunch, as if the word itself could mend things. Regulars reappeared one by one with the awkward courage of people visiting a friend after surgery. The back corner table remained empty by common law. The server moved with careful humour, offering extra bread like an apology from the universe. Our detective stopped by first thing, not to interrogate but to calibrate. He wore the expression city workers develop when they're trying to encourage gravity to be gentle. The owner waved him in with a nod that had learned 2 new languages since last week. "How's the door?" the detective asked, because in this story that is basically a wellness check. "It squeaks again," the owner said. People clap. The detective smiled. That's community theatre. He sat at the counter with coffee that remembered his preferences. The radio murmured weather and a baseball score that sounded like a moral. Someone ordered eggplant, the way a man orders a truce. The kitchen breathed out steam like a dragon on a union break. A pair of uniforms came in, not the kind that give tickets, the kind that receive confessions from benches. They ordered sandwiches with the solemnity of treaties, and sat where they could watch the door without being obvious about it. The server refilled waters with a gentleness usually reserved for new parents and explosives. The detective didn't take notes. He took in the temperature. The block's heartbeat had slowed. It wasn't back to resting, but it had decided to live. On his way out, he passed a small cluster of neighbours performing the ritual known as "we're not talking about it while we talk about it." A woman in a denim jacket said, "You hear they say he was," and her friend cut her off with a look that translated to use the polite word. "Unalive," the friend said. "Right," the woman nodded. "Unalive." Language, too, had adjusted. He headed to the charity the reporter had mentioned, the one with a mission statement so vague it could cover weather, literacy, and the moon. The office lived in a brownstone whose stoop had opinions about shoes. Inside, a receptionist in a cardigan of ironclad pleasantness asked if he had an appointment. "Are you now?" he said, and showed a badge without introducing it. The director arrived with a smile polished by fundraising. He knew the detective from television in the same way everyone knows everyone from television, inaccurately, but with conviction. "How can we be of service?" he asked, which is a sentence that should always be weighed on a scale. "I'm chasing paper," the detective said. "One of your checks pays rent for a community program with very efficient trucks." The director's smile remained obedient. "We support many initiatives that enhance quality of life." "Does quality of life include curb occupancy permits?" "Sometimes," the director said, considering his next word carefully enough to invoice it. "We help with logistics for neighborhood events, parades, street fairs." "And alley maintenance?" "Neighborhoods have alleys," the director said, which wasn't an answer but was at least true. "We outsource to contractors who comply with all regulations and also with whichever regulations apply." "Who chooses the contractors?" "A committee," he said promptly, which is what people say when one person decides. "Who's on the committee?" "Civic partners," he said, and produced a list whose ink was still drying. The names were exactly the sort of names you put on lists like this. Respectable, vaguely familiar, capable of throwing a dinner. One name belonged to our fixer with the neat wrist. It had a title, Community Liaison. "And this one?" the detective asked, tapping it with the pen that had leaked on the bar napkin last night. He's a bridge, the director said, between needs and solutions. Bridges charge tolls, the detective said, and pocketed a brochure about improving neighborhoods through collaboration. Outside, the city had leaned into sunshine. People forgave taxis. Pigeons rehearsed. A child dragged a helium balloon that tried to defect skyward. The detective stood on the stoop long enough to recognize the car that wasn't parked across the street yesterday. It was parked there today. It had patience in the glove compartment. He walked to the curb and looked in the reflection of a window. Two men in the car studied nothing with fierce attention. He nodded the professional nod that means, "We can see each other, we will pretend we can't." They nodded back. New York is a very polite town when it wants to do. At the precinct, his partner had news and a sandwich that had given. "Routers vote now?" "In this city, everything votes," the partner said. "Even chairs." They split a to-do list with the bland confidence of men who had broken to-do lists before. The detective went to find Mr. Asphalt. The partner went to make friends with a clerk who guarded the permit office like a dragon that had read Proust. Mr. Asphalt met him on a job site that smelled like summer and contracts. They stood near a pothole that had joined the union and received benefits. Mr. Asphalt had a face that looked carved from the road itself. He referred to himself in the third person if it helps negotiation. "We fill holes," Mr. Asphalt said, gesturing at the city like a floor plan. "You cops make them. We fix them. Everybody eats." "Speaking of eating," the detective said, "you had lunch with a man who sells introductions." "Many men sell many things," Mr. Asphalt said. "Some sell lunch and call it introductions." "The Charities Committee to Enhance Quality of Life," the detective said. "Our friend with the neat wrist sits on it." Mr. Asphalt took off his hard hat and let the sun reconsider him. "Quality of life is a good phrase," he said. "You can invoice it." "You pay for curb space through the charity," the detective said. "The charity pays the city. Everyone sleeps well." "Curb space is democracy," Mr. Asphalt said. "People should share." "When does sharing become choreography?" Mr. Asphalt put the hard hat back on. "When the music starts." "Whose band?" "The city's," he said, which is a polite way to say, the band changes, the song doesn't. The detective left with a card and a headache, and a renewed respect for metaphors that wear steel-toed boots. He called his partner. "Our fixer's fingerprints aren't on anything," he said, "which is how you know it's him." "Clerk says the curb permit request came through a city council office," the partner said. "Routine, stamped, filed, blessed. If you're going to move the furniture, get a moving permit." "Which office?" "Seat currently occupied by a man who loves ribbon cuttings," the partner said. "His scheduler knows the charity director's assistant's sister. Nothing illegal, just familial." "Cousins," the detective said. "Always cousins," the partner agreed. Afternoon drifted toward a more serious version of itself. The detective returned to Joe and Mary's because sometimes the point of investigation is remembering what isn't paper. The server brought him coffee without asking. He thanked her with a tip that said, "You're doing a hard job and I noticed." A woman at the counter told a story about her uncle's radiator that was absolutely not a story about anything else. A man at a table near the window argued with the newspaper on behalf of the Mets. Two teenagers came in and asked if there was a special for students and got one, because kindness is cheaper than advertising. He took a slow walk to the courtyard and stood near the empty back corner table. He looked up at the cutout of sky that had witnessed too much and not enough. He listened to the honest squeak of the door as someone from the kitchen pushed through with a tray of glasses. The sound small and human and, there was no other word, alive. Back out front, a man he had never seen before took the stool next to him and ordered coffee. The man had the careful haircut of a broker and the watch of a man who doesn't check it because everyone else will. He nodded at the detective's badge without comment. "You from the building?" the man asked. "I'm from the arguments," the detective said. The man smiled politely. "I handle accounts," he said. "For charities, for clubs, for kitchens that want to stay kitchens." "Knee wrist?" the detective asked mildly. The man looked at his own hand like it had told a joke without him. "Some of us were taught penmanship," he said. "It's a lost art." "Does your art include umbrellas?" "Sometimes," the man said, "on rainy days." He sipped coffee like a verdict. "Detective, the city already decided. Your work is admirable. It will not be rewarded." "Not by you," the detective said. "Not by outcome," the man said. "Outcome has appointments." He placed money under the saucer and left with the air of someone who had just signed for a package addressed to fate. The detective didn't follow. There is a time for following and a time for memorizing a gate. He chose the latter. He called his partner. "Knee-wrist just introduced himself," he said. "He's proud of his penmanship." "No way we even bid to hear l'affaire." "Didn't see it," the detective said. "But I know the sound of his shoes. They don't squeak." Evening found him at his desk with the board that had grown crowded. He started moving things again, not because they needed moving, but because sometimes the mind requires a gesture to believe in progress. He drew a line from charity to council office to permit to truck to door to courtyard. Then, in a small act of optimism, he added, "morning after," and drew the line back to Joe and Mary's. He took a breath. The city took one with him. A junior detective poked his head in. "Boss, reporters here," he said, like announcing a storm that could either water your garden or cancel the game. She stepped in with the tote bag again, and a smile that had filed for press credentials. "I have something you don't," she said. "I have coffee that might argue," he said. "A schedule," she said, dropping a photocopy that had survived a fax machine. "Your neat wrist had a standing appointment every Thursday morning at a social club off Lorimer. On the calendar, it's coded as choir practice." "Tin of graphite in the back room," he said. She blinked, pleased they were reading the same book. "Also," she continued, "a check cut from the charity to a vendor labeled Door Services. The vendor's address is a P.O. box inside a bodega where the cat decides who gets mail." "The cat votes too," he said. She lowered her voice. "You can't say any of this on the record yet, but if you push the charity through the council office, you'll find a staffer who loves talk radio and hates subpoenas. He'll give you the rest because he believes in civic hygiene." "Hygiene is underrated," he said. She looked at his board, at the stringless string of it, and nodded with professional respect. "You'll never get the upstairs names," she said, "but you'll get the middle ones. Sometimes that's enough to change the downstairs." "Downstairs is where the door lives," he said. They walked out together. The city had cooled. The streetlights auditioned halo effects. Somewhere, a saxophone forgave a trumpet. They parted at the corner with the unspoken agreement of colleagues who are our colleagues, but are definitely on the same street. On his way home, the detective passed a church where a janitor was locking up. The janitor recognized him as a recurring character. "You catch the men?" the janitor asked. "I'm catching the weather," the detective said. "Harder," the janitor said, amused. "Weather always wins." "Not always," the detective said. "Sometimes it apologizes." He slept lightly, woke early, and put on a suit that had been to more hearings than weddings. The plan for the next day was simple. Visit the council office, talk to the staffer with convictions about hygiene, subpoena the charity's vendor list, invite the fixer to a conversation in a room with temperature control, and remind the world that doors are supposed to be too polite. Before sunrise, he stopped at Joe and Mary's for coffee to go. The owner was already there, straightening sugar packets with a reverence that suggested prayer. "You going to make it right?" the owner asked, not angrily, not even hopeful, just practical. "I'm going to make it honest," the detective said. "Honest is a start," the owner said. "Honest gets you to lunch." Outside, the city finally exhaled. You could hear it in the way the buses sighed, in the way a bakery door opened, in the way the back door at Joe and Mary's offered its small squeak to the morning as if to say, "Still here." The street had held its breath long enough. Now it wanted to talk. Social clubs in New York are where history goes to play cards. The banquettes remember more names than the plaques. The wallpaper is a witness. And somewhere in back there's always a room for events that are neither social nor club. On the calendar, these events have euphemisms: maintenance review, community outreach, choir practice. Choirs, famously, do meet in rooms with no piano. The club off Lorimer had the proper credentials: a neon sign that still believed, a door that did not, and a bartender who could fold a napkin into a subpoena. In the back, the room smelled faintly of graphite, and louder of cigars that had made promises to better days. On the shelf, a tin that said "door" in neat handwriting, as if etiquette could be tinned. Our detective arrived in daylight, which is considered rude by places that prefer their sunlight second-hand. He flashed his badge, which is an all-access pass to awkward silences. The bartender considered whether the day required cooperation, and decided it did, but only in lowercase. "Backrooms for members," the bartender said. "I'm a member of the city," the detective said. "That's a large club," the bartender said, and unlocked the door anyway. Inside folding chairs with opinions, a long table that had negotiated more ceasefires than anyone in government, and a bulletin board featuring a bowling team from 1970 pictured with trophies and hair. On the table sat a clean ledger book, too clean, like a conscience used for company. Next to it, a brass bell, kind you ring when you want quiet to applaud. He sat, because sitting changes the angle of a room's memory. He flipped the ledger. It was immaculate and also unhelpful. Columns of dues, notes about holiday raffles, nothing with verbs. Choir practice appeared every Thursday, written in a wrist with discipline issues. He pressed his finger against indentations left on a blank page. Someone had written on the page above, hard enough to leave ghosts. He angled the book toward the light and rubbed the surface with the flat of a pencil. Words rose like guilty secrets. Truck, curb, noon, alley, and 3 first names too common to be useful, unless you already knew them. The bartender knocked on the doorframe with the etiquette of a man telling you the tide is coming in. "You'll want to talk to Sal," he said. "He keeps the keys and the stories." Sal arrived with a ring of keys that weighed like a hobby, and a face that said he had no hobbies. He nodded at the detective, as if they'd agreed to disagree in a previous lifetime. "We're a club," Sal said. "We play cards, we raise money for widows, we yell at televisions. That's the mission statement." "And choir practice?" the detective asked. Sal shrugged with great professionalism. "A joke," he said. "We don't sing. Some fellas meet, talk about the bowling schedule. It's not a felony to organize pins." "Pins don't need graphite," the detective said. "Doors do." Sal looked at the shelf, like a man realizing his furniture had started leaving clues. "People borrow," he said. "We're neighborly." "Neverly is a good word," the detective said. "It covers sins and casseroles." Sal's keys jingled in a minor key. "Detective, we pay our taxes, we hold raffles, we sponsor a little league team that never wins. If men use this room to talk about maintenance, how is that?" "Maintenance for whose door?" The detective cut in gently. Because I have a door in Bushwick that suddenly found religion. Sal sighed, the kind of sigh that has a mailing address. We rent the room, he said. Cash. In an envelope. They signed the book. The book with blank pages, the detective said. Sal spread his hands. Cleanliness is next to godliness. Godliness never met subpoenas, the detective said. He left with photocopies of nothing and a photograph in his phone of everything. Outside, the reporter was waiting with the patience of a cat who knows the kitchen schedule. Choir practice? She asked. 3 tenors and a baritone, he said. I have your baritone, she said, passing him a clipping, a charity gala photo. There he was, fixer with the neat wrist, standing between a councilman and a priest, all 3 men smiling at a check the size of a coffee table. The caption credited the charity for improving quality of life. Do you ever get tired of that phrase, he asked. I get tired of phrases, she said. People are less predictable. They walked the block. She caught him. The staffer at the council office had indeed practiced civic hygiene. He provided emails that said nothing and implied a chorus. The charity had requested facilitated permits for community maintenance on specific alleys, including the one behind Joe and Mary's, over a 7-day window. A city liaison had approved with a rubber stamp so enthusiastic it probably needed ice afterward. And the payment? He asked. Vendor called Door Services, she said. Paid through a P.O. box with a cat. Our cat refuses to comment. He allowed himself the smallest smile. Respect the cat. Always, she said. Also, your neat wrist filed a reimbursement form for the graphite tin, itemized as lubricant for community access. Honest to a fault. Honest and polite, he said. Our theme. He sent the new information to his partner, who replied with a thumbs up that somehow conveyed exhaustion. Then he made a choice that would either be productive or at least entertaining. He invited the fixer for coffee. The fixer chose a hotel lounge where the lighting made everyone eligible for indulgence. He arrived on tie, which in his line of work is also a flex. He wore a suit that didn't know how to wrinkle and a tie that wouldn't dare. Detective, he said, you look like a man who wants to choreograph traffic. I'm more interested in who hired the band, the detective said. Bands are self-organizing, the fixer said, amused. So are cities, with the right sheet music. Who provided the sheet music for the alley? The neighborhood, he said, spreading his hands. Everyone wants the alley to behave. We merely introduce lubricant to a tense situation. Graphicked? Civic kindness, he said. Doors should open when residents need them. And when polite men need them, he raised an eyebrow. Polite men are residents, he said, of fine, if nothing else. Who paid the track? A contractor, he said. All legal, all documented, all filed. If you enjoyed paperwork, this is a thrilling romance. The charity covered it, the detective said. The charity improves quality of life, he said. Have you seen that alley? It's a menace to strollers. Strollers don't schedule themselves for noon, the detective said. He smiled. Detective, the city prefers narratives it can file. You're writing an epic. They accept pamphlets. Try me, the detective said. The fixer leaned in just enough to suggest intimacy without risking trust. Let's say a neighborhood has a problem. The problem is loud. The neighbors want quiet. People with umbrellas think about rain. Someone calls for choir practice. You can't arrest a metaphor. You can if it invoices, the detective said. He laughed softly. Then you'll arrest all of us, he said, because in New York, everyone invoices the weather. Tell me why, the detective said, keeping his voice even. not the choreography, the reason the music started. The city needed a reset, the fixer said. You can't run a block with a trumpet section that refuses to modulate. People want to walk their kids without a headline. He sat back. This was a civic correction. A man was made unalive, the detective said. And the city continued, the fixer said. As it must, as it always will. Detective, you chase names because the law respects nouns. I manage verbs. Tomorrow has to function. The detective considered the temptation to stand up and announce handcuffs. He allowed it to pass like a bus that says out of service but stops anyway. We're not done talking, he said. We never are, the fixer said, and left a tip so generous it felt like an argument. Outside, the sidewalk tried on evening. He called his partner. He thinks he's the city's conscience, the detective said. Most consciences don't bill by the hour, the partner said. Our council staffer is ready to sing if subpoenaed. He has a folder labelled Stuff I Don't Want to Testify About, which he thinks makes it private. Get the folder, the detective said. They reconvened at the precinct, with coffee and the energy of men pushing a heavy object uphill, because gravity was being smug. The folder contained exactly what the label promised. Emails with subject lines like RE, maintenance, notes from community partners, a spreadsheet of curb permits cross-listed with events, and a memo about the unfortunate courtyard incident using all the correct euphemisms. At the bottom, a list of liaisons with initials instead of names. One set of initials matched the fixer's, another set matched someone higher up who preferred public ribbon cuttings to private consequences. Enough for a hearing, the partner said. Not enough for bracelets. Sometimes hearings are bracelets, the detective said. They drafted requests and courtesies disguised as demands. They CC'd people who made phones ring. They scheduled a visit with the charity's board council, who would smile through fire. They wrote a letter to the club off Lorimer asking for membership rosters dating back to bowling trophies. They did the part of the job that looks least like television and most like office work, with better lighting. The reporter texted, "Choir practice moving to a different room." She added a winking emoji, which is a modern way of saying, "Hurry up." The next morning they arrived at the club just as a meet broke like a wave. Men left in pairs, 3 at a time, singly and in thoughtful silence. The fixer was not among them. Sal watched from behind the bar, polishing a glass that had been polished into transparency. The detective stepped into the back room and found the ledger gone, the bell replaced by a pitcher of water, and the graphite tin moved 2 inches to the left. The bulletin board now displayed a signed note for a picnic. He smiled. The room thought it had redecorated. It had, in fact, confessed. "Looking for hymns?" the bartender asked. "Just checking the acoustics," the detective said. On his way out, he ran into a priest, one from the gala photo, carrying 2 trays of ziti-like benedictions. The priest recognized him from the neighborhood and thanked him for keeping the peace, which is what you say when you're avoiding saying other things. "Father," the detective said, "do choirs ever practice without singing?" Constantly, the priest said, "It's called meeting." He smiled in a way that admitted knowledge of calendars if fit names. "Detective, I pray for outcomes. You work on inputs." "God sees the receipts," the priest said, and kept walking. Afternoon brought subpoenas with the gentle clatter of doom. The council office discovered a sudden passion for transparency. The charity's council recommended cooperation in a memo that used the word "fulsome" twice and meant neither. The club considered whether the picnic should be potato salad or macaroni and opted for both, because division is unwise in a city this small. In Bushwick, the door at Joe and Mary's continued its honest squeak. People began to eat in the courtyard again, some choosing the back corner on purpose, as if to argue with the universe. The owner moved through the room like a man carrying both history and water. Our detective sat for a late lunch, alone, with the comfort of being a regular at a place that had survived a headline. The server brought him the good bread and a look that said, "We are still here." He lifted his glass in a small toast to the room. The room lifted itself back. A man slid onto the stool beside him. Not the fixer, a new face, younger. He wore a jacket he didn't deserve and a watch that had lied about its price. He ordered coffee and stared at the detective with the curiosity of a recruit. "You the guy," the man said. "Possibly," the detective said. "They said you were stubborn," the man said. "Said you'd keep knocking until the door learned a new sound." "I'm teaching vocabulary," the detective said. The man leaned in. "They're moving choir practice," he said softly. "Different room, different club, same hymn. Why tell me?" The man shrugged like a man testing out integrity for size. "Because my cousin says the city belongs to whoever cares the most, and today it looks like you." He scribbled an address on the back of a matchbook and left enough cash to insult the concept of coffee. Then he left without looking back, which is either bravery or training. The detective flipped the matchbook. The address belonged to a social hall near the water, bigger rooms, better soundproofing, nicer chairs. He called his partner. "Field trip," he said. They arrived to find doors that had mastered neutrality and a manager who had the soul of a ledger. "Private event," the manager said, pronouncing the phrase as if it paid taxes. "We love private events," the detective said. "They're great for the public." The manager considered the mathematics of that and led them to a hallway where you could hear nothing and somehow hear everything. Laughter, glass, a bell not unlike the one that had rung for quiet at the other club. He knocked and then opened without waiting. The room froze, as rooms do when they realize they're about to be named. At the head of the table sat the fixer, neat wrist mid-gesture. He smiled the smile he kept for cameras, then let it drop for efficiency. Around him sat men who didn't consider themselves an audience. On the table, maps, calendars, a tin of graphite labelled Community Access, and a printed email that read subject, Maintenance. "Afternoon choir," the detective said. "We were just discussing outreach," the fixer said, not missing a step. "Can we help you reaching out?" "Yes," the detective said. "Hand me that tin." A silence followed, brief and educational. The fixer kept his eye contact steady, then reached for the tin and slid it across with a courtesy that would photograph well. The detective held it at. The room inhaled. "Gentlemen," the detective said, "this is me singing." He pocketed the tin in a gesture equal parts theatre and warning. "You're all receiving subpoenas," he added. "Consider them invitations. The city would love to hear your choir." The fixer's smile returned, slightly smaller. "We believe in civic participation," he said. "Then bring sheet music," the detective said, and left before the room could decide whether to applaud or make calls. On the sidewalk, his partner let out the laugh he'd been holding. "Bellissimo," he said, which in cop means, "nice move. We'll pay for it later." "They'll lawyer up," the partner added. "Great," the detective said. "Lawyers sing on the record." They walked to the car past a river that had seen more commerce than confessions. The city looked exactly the same as it always does when something irreversible has just happened. A ferry honked. A jogger negotiated with humidity. Back in Bushwick, Joe and Mary's served dinner to a room that had decided to be brave about it. The owner propped the back door open for an hour, letting in air and the faint sound of a neighborhood continuing. The squeak worked like punctuation. The reporter called. "You really walked out with the tin?" she asked, delighted. I'm building a percussion section, he said. Save me a front row seat, she said. I think the city's ready for a concert. He hung up and looked at his board, now heavier with nouns and braver with lines. Charity to council, to permits to trucks, to doors, to rooms called choir practice. Politeness as camouflage, courtesy as leverage, quality of life as a budget line. He wrote one more phrase at the top, the middle sings. Then he underlined it, hard. Night came on like a curtain that knows its cues. Somewhere, the three polite men practiced being shadows again, because that is what shadows do. Somewhere else upstairs, people measured chairs and futures. Down here, on the ground floor where doors squeak and restaurants heal, the detective finished his coffee and decided to sleep before the concert. Because tomorrow, the choir would have to perform where the microphones are, and for once the city might prefer lyrics to humming. The phrase quality of life does a lot of heavy lifting. It can justify planting trees and removing benches. It can explain noise ordinances and fireworks, community gardens and strategic forgetfulness. It's a phrase with a day job and a night life. In the week after the courtyard, it showed up everywhere. On memum, on podiums, on lips that preferred adjectives to nouns. Our detective started his morning with it printed across a banner in the lobby of a municipal building designed to intimidate pigeons. A press conference was forming, the way weather forms. Microphones gathered, cameras rehearsed focus, and staffers adjusted the world by moving water bottles half an inch at a time. The councilman with the ribbon-cutting habit stepped up to the podium and smiled like the city had just passed a quiz. We are committed to the quality of life of every neighborhood, he said, emphasizing every the way a man emphasizes a word he's rented. To that end, we are streamlining permits for community maintenance and safety. The detective watched from the back with the calm of a man who had seen streamlining used as both solution and solvent. He recognized two staffers, one of whom believed in civic hygiene, the other believed in calendars. Both believed in the phrase, on the banner, because their paychecks did. Reporters asked questions, good and bad. The councilman answered with words that had all been introduced to each other at the rehearsal. He didn't say umbrella, he didn't say alley, he said together 4 times. The city nodded. Together is comforting, even when it's a crowd scene with no credits. After the cameras packed up, the detective found the hygienic staffer in a hallway with earnest lighting. You brought the folder, he said. I brought a copy of the folder, the staffer corrected, holding it like a choir book. I also brought a lawyer's card, because I'm not brave, I'm tidy. Tidy is brave in this town, the detective said, and took the copy. It contained the emails he'd already seen, plus an attachment titled Maintenance Alignment Framework, which is what you name a plan when it doesn't want to be guilty of plotting. He skimmed. The framework suggested partnering with community liaisons to identify infrastructural stress points in alleys and courtyards, and coordinating temporary curb occupancy for equipment staging. It listed a liaison table with initials, his fixer among them, and a note. All communications verbal, unless otherwise required. Verbal is a beautiful word, he said. It's the city's favourite, the staffer said. No typos. He thanked the staffer and walked out into a blue morning performing optimism. On the steps, the reporter waited with coffee and a grin earned by long nights. You're trending, she said. Quietin is a hit. I'll sell tickets, he said. She matched his stride. I'm hearing the Charities Council is preparing a statement about cooperation and values. It will use the word fulsome incorrectly again. Maybe they'll misspell it, he said. Hope is a strategy, she said, deadpan. They parted with the efficiency of people who had learned to narrate without narrating. He headed to the charity's office for the meeting their council had agreed to, in a tone suggesting they preferred phone calls to consequences. The board counsel wore a suit that had argued with worse facts and won. He offered water as if hydration might mitigate subpoenas. "Detective," he said, "we support any and all inquiries that aim to improve the quality of life." "There it is again," the detective said. "We have nothing to hide," counsel continued. "We believe in transparency." He gestured at a stack of folders tied with ribbon. "Here are our recent vendor lists and contracts. Door service." An independent contractor, counsel said, vetted, insured, and according to their invoices, very fond of lubrication. "Graphite is a crowd pleaser," the detective said. Counsel's smile did nothing. "You understand, detective, our donors expect us to act quickly when communities request assistance. If a liaison identifies a hazard, we facilitate solutions." "Your liaison facilitated a truck to block an alley at noon," the detective said. Counsel lifted a brow. "We facilitate many trucks," he said. "Trucks are the city's bloodstream." "Who approves the schedules?" A committee, counsel said, refusing to smirk. He paged the vendor list. Door services appeared 18 times in 3 months. The P.O. box address remained loyal to the cat. Each invoice described access improvements and community ingress management. The dates formed a map if you knew how to squint. "Do you also facilitate umbrellas?" the detective asked. "We facilitate outcomes," counsel said, and then, because he was a professional, added, "lawful outcomes." "Define lawful," the detective said. "Define door," counsel replied, pleasantly. He left with copies and a promise of ongoing partnership. Outside, the clouds considered their options. The city as weather, the way people have moods. Today's mood was collaborative, with a chance of denial. Back at the precinct, his partner had acquired a wall calendar from the social hall by the water, for events planning, the manager had said, forgetting the definition of events. The calendar featured highlighted Thursdays labelled with a tasteful choir icon. "We're going to need a bigger corkboard," the partner said. They mapped dates to permits, to truck rentals, to access improvements. The lines began to make a shape. Not the kind you could show a jury yet, but a shape the city would recognize if it looked in a mirror. "You've got the middlemen," the partner said. "We're still missing the upstairs, the ones who invented Folsom." "Upstairs has rugs," the detective said. "We'll pull the corners." They sent a formal notice to the councilman's office requesting testimony from the Community Liaison Committee. They CC council. They CC a newspaper, because accidents happen. Then the phone rang. It was the fixer. "Detective," he said, "your paperwork is very energetic." "It's a cardio routine," the detective said. "Let's avoid theatrics," the fixer said. "We both live here." "Then you know the doors," the detective said. "I know the weather," the fixer said, "and I can tell when a storm will ruin everyone's picnic." "You concerned about potato salad?" "I'm concerned about fallout that lands on innocent people," the fixer said. "The men who arrange trucks and doors are at policy. They are implements. You don't punish hammers for architecture. You punish the hand that swings them," the detective said. A pause, a recalibration. "Come by," the fixer said. "Neutral ground, we'll exchange verbs." He chose a conference room in a building with a view of the river, and the habit of hosting negotiations that produce statements about moving forward. The fixer stood by the window like a man auditioning for a skyline. On the table, carafafes, copies of the framework, a box of pastries no one would eat. "I can give you a name," the fixer said without preamble. "One. Not upstairs, mid-landing. The kind who authorizes emails to be written by other people. Villages where no one becomes Lady Slick gowns and encourage morals in the air. He tensed a Tigyan Kyle touch but had vast and pidden into remounted angers, obviously. You can take recognizing the Yuli upon the messes. A distinction, he said, that you understand the difference between civic maintenance and what happened in the courtyard, that you won't bury the former under the latter. The detective weighed it. Mercy isn't the opposite of accuracy. Say the name, he said. The fixer gave it, a deputy director of operations who attended ribbon cuttings with a look of focused humility and preferred phone calls to inboxes. The fixer outlined a meeting where schedules were reviewed and neighborhood stress points identified language that would sound like blood pressure when read into a microphone. Why help me? The detective asked. Because quality of life, the fixer said, and didn't laugh. The city needs the maintenance. It doesn't need the choir to become the opera. You're not the conductor, the detective said. No, the fixer said. Just a guy who knows where the sheet music is stored. He took the name. He didn't sign anything. He didn't promise anything beyond the truth and his lousy handwriting. Leaving, he passed a hallway where a plaque listed donors, whose names felt like addresses. The city is a web of gratitude, with invoices. The deputy director didn't come quietly, but he came. A subpoena is a kind of prayer. He sat in a room with a microphone and a pitcher of water and answered questions with the stamina of a man who had trained in the sport of not say things. The detective watched from the back as counsel asked about frameworks and liaisons and mitigations. The deputy said collaborative 6 times. He said silo once, tragically. Then came the moment that rearranges furniture. A committee member held up the vendor list from the charity and asked why a P.O. Box cat was improving access across 4 neighborhoods. The deputy blinked. We rely on our partners to vet subcontractors, he said. And your partners rely on you to pay attention, the committee member said. The deputy glanced at the fixer in the audience. The fixer's expression was famous for not being expressions. The deputy drank water as if hydration were a defense. After the hearing, the reporter joined the detective on the steps. Middlemen on the record, she said. That's a headline that takes stairs. Upstairs we'll see they were in a different building, he said. She nodded toward the river. You can't indict weather, she said. But you can write about it. He went to Joe and Mary's because the end of a long day prefers a chair that knows your name. The room was busy in the way that makes restaurants immortal. The owner set down a plate the detective hadn't ordered, and a look that said, "This one's on the house, and on the house's heart." "How's the door?" the detective asked, because rituals are anchors. "It squeaks like it means it," the owner said. "People say it's music." "Choir practice," the detective said. They both smiled without needing to explain why. The night brought a message from his partner. The young guy with the too confident watch had been seen near the social hall taking out garbage after meetings. A useful detail. Every choir needs someone to fold chairs. The partner suggested a chat. The detective found the kid on a stoop, smoking ambition. "You decided to care again," the detective said. "I decided to practice a different hymn," the kid said. "One with fewer envelopes." "Tell me about upstairs," the detective said. "There is no upstairs," the kid said reflexively, then reconsidered. "There's a landing. Guys who listen to guys who listen. They love quality of life because it sounds like a blanket." He tapped ash into a car that had known better seasons. "Blankets cover a lot." "Names," the detective said. The kid gave 2. Not famous, durable, men who chaired subcommittees and played golf with budgets. Men who could argue that trucks are a kind of kindness. Men who didn't dial phones, they were dialed. "Why tell me?" the detective asked. "Because the door squeaks again," the kid said simply. Some things should tribute. He went home through a city feeling slightly taller, like it had remembered a good posture. On his board he pinned 2 new names on the landing and drew a dotted line toward a floor he didn't need to see to know it existed. He wrote Maintenance versus Mercy. Then he crossed out VS and wrote And. In the borrowed apartment above the hardware store, the 3 polite men were now practicing invisibility without rehearsal. They moved separately. They thought about the middle like professionals. One of them considered leaving town with the sincerity of a man rehearsing a lie. The other 2 liked the weather too much to relocate. At the charity, council drafted a statement about lessons learned. At the council office, calendars discovered caution. At the clubs, choir practice discovered private homes and the acoustics of kitchen tables. The city adjusted the way cities adjust, by insisting it had always been this way. At Joe and Mary's, a family celebrated a birthday at the back corner table. When the cake arrived, the room applauded. The owner propped open the door for the candle smoke, and the squeak harmonized with the singing in a way that made 3 people wipe their eyes, for reasons that would sound foolish if explained. The detective sat at the counter, finishing coffee that had worked as hard as he had. The reporter slid onto the stool beside him, with a headline she couldn't print yet and a smile she could. Quality of life, she said, toasting with her cup. May it include honesty, he said, clinking. And doors that complain, she said. Outside, the city took a breath you could hear if you lived here long enough. Buses sighed, a hydrant hummed. Somewhere, a saxophone insisted on 1958 again because some arguments are meant to be lost beautifully. The detective looked at the board in his head. Doors, trucks, permits, choir practice, liaisons, landings, a deputy who hydrated, a fixer who curated verbs, threads, knots, a pattern that wasn't art but would hold weight. He stood, left exact cash, and walked into a night that had decided to forgive the day enough to let tomorrow have a chance. Buildings don't brag about their landings. They brag about the lobby and the penthouse. But most of the actual living arguments, mail, decisions about shoes, happens on the landing. Government works the same. Upstairs has views, downstairs has keys, and the landing has clipboards. The morning began with clipboards. Our detective carried one into a conference room whose thermostat was set to respectable. The committee chairs, men from the landing, took their seats with the dignified discomfort of people who are used to being asked questions by anyone not in a tuxedo. Their suits were better than their sleep. The first name on the agenda belonged to a chair of a subcommittee on civic access and logistics, which is how you describe traffic when you want to invoice it. He adjusted his tie as if the knot could solve policy. Next to him sat his colleague from Neighborhood Safety Integration, which exists primarily to attend meetings titled Integration. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with us," counsel said, which meant, "You are here. We are pleased. Do not attempt the fire alarm." "We're all on the same side," the chair said, which is a phrase that sounds nice right up until sides are counted. Our detective watched from the back and let the room do what rooms do. The chairs used paragraphs. Council used questions with handles. Who approved the framework that coordinated alley access, curb occupancy, and equipment staging with outside community partners' words? "The committee," said the chair, pleased to have remembered the script. "And who is the committee?" He listed names that sounded like insurance policies. The detective circled 2 that matched the kid's stoop confession. The landing, in full regalia. Door Services is listed as an access vendor in multiple neighborhoods, counsel continued. What verification did the committee perform? "We rely on partners," the safety man said. "Trusted liaisons. We don't vet cats." "Do you vet Trucks are the city's bloodstream," the chair said, having done the assigned reading. The room gave a polite laugh. the kind you give a man quoting a brochure. And scheduling? Counsel asked. Who decided on the time slots? A liaison proposed, the chair said. We concurred. The hours were convenient for residents. Rivers, places and views. Lunch is a flexible concept, he said, then heard himself and regretted being alive that minute. Our detective read the mood. The landing was discovering that euphemism has a narrow spine when made to stand. He caught the fixer's eye across the room. The fixer's neat wrist was hidden, but his expression said, You wanted the middle. Here's the middle. After the session, the chairs were escorted out by staffers who whispered in a dialect known as crisis management. The committee counsel approached the detective. Progress, she said, in the careful tone of a person who deals in minor miracles and receipts. Next, the deputy, the detective said. He'll hydrate, she said. They always do. He stepped into the hall for air you could return to. The reporter waited with a notebook that worked out. They said lunch is flexible, she said, delighted and appalled. I eat that line for a week. Don't choke, he said. She tilted her head. Your landing boys are going to claim maintenance with bad optics. They'll say the choir didn't have sheet music. They won't say opera. Opera is above their pay grade, he said. They'll give you one wrong pot to save the rest, she predicted. The city's favourite hymn. He nodded, then checked his phone. A message from his partner. Young guy with the borrowed watch is nervous enough to be useful. He has a bag of shredded paper and a guilty conscience. Tell him shredders can be read, the detective replied. They met the kid in a coffee shop that served regret with foam. He slid a freezer bag across the table like a spy who had confused format with substance. Inside, cross-cut confetti in the colours of city stationery. I panicked, the kid said. Then I remembered you said doors should complain. Shredders complain if you listen, the detective said. You pull the pieces too fast, they scream. The kid stared. Is that a metaphor? In this city, the detective said, everything is. He took the bag back to the precinct and handed it to a technician who kept puzzle books in her desk for relaxation. She looked at the confetti like it had disappointed her, but might still try harder. Give me a day, she said, and a lamp. The detective made rounds. He walked the block around Joe and Mary's because street time counts differently. He timed the trucks that had legitimate reasons to exist. He mapped how a curb fills up and empties out. He watched a delivery guy balance 12 foil trays on one arm and navigate a door that squeaked without instructions. He watched the door watched him back in its way. The hinge told him, I remember, but I won't talk. That's not what hinges do. Back at the precinct, the board had grown a spine. The charity's invoices formed a calendar. The club calendars lined up with the permit office's weekly rhythm. The deputy's hydration schedule matched the hearing schedule. The fixer's name lived where verbs belonged. The partner returned, chewing a pencil, in a way pencils resent. Council office wants to know if cooperation includes immunity, he said. Cooperation includes cooperation, the detective said. Press wants a comment, the partner added. Tell them the door squeaks again, the detective said. Evening brought a text from the technician. Your confetti used to be emails, reconstructed 3 pages. One has a type column, another has liaison notes. The last says courtyard ready next to the date. She attached photos. The handwriting on the notes page had a familiar neatness. Need wrist mead glue. He printed the pages and laid them next to the charity invoices, the curb permits, the framework. The shape grew muscle. In the notes, truck confirmed, door prep complete, lunch window optimal, choir standing by. He could hear the defense already. Lunch window optimal for maintenance, choir standing by for volunteers. There is a reason euphemism is the city's second language. He called the fixer and didn't bother with greetings. "Your wrist writes nice," he said. A pause, and then, "Detective, you know the difference between writing and authoring." "You signed the choir's attendance sheet," the detective said. "I signed the weather report," the fixer said. "You're the one chasing rain." "Come in tomorrow," the detective said. "Bring your verbs." "Will there be pastries?" "Only if you sing," the detective said. He didn't expect a confession. He expected structure. Sometimes that's better. Confessions wobble. Structure holds. He stepped out for air again and found the reporter on a bench negotiating with a pretzel. "You look like you nicknamed a piece of paper," she said. "I nicknamed 3, he said, and gave her the gist without the photos, because lines matter even when the day doesn't. "Tomorrow's hearing will hum," she said. "I'll bring extra batteries." "Bring patience," he said. "They'll try to outlast us with synonyms." Morning came dressed like an apology. Cooler air, a sky that didn't need to prove anything. The hearing room was standing room only, staffers, reporters, a few residents who had decided government was a spectator sport, and 2 men from the landing with faces that had tried sleep and failed. The fixer sat in the second row with a smile that paid taxes. Counsel began with courtesy and moved to Staples. "Deputy Director," she said, "do you recognize this schedule?" She held up a reconstructed page from the confetti, pieces joined with the care of a quilt. The deputy blinked. "Hydrated. It appears to be an internal coordination document," he said. "Meldon, for no perfect details, will be restoring telling you in a lean you gotta take some peril to tux lowly houses and special like the whole matty. Be sure the really heavily bias." "It would have been prepared by staff," he said carefully. "We don't micromanage door lubrication." A murmur. The reporter's pen smiled. "And this note courtyard ready refers to what?" "Completion of access improvements," he said. "Safety features." "Safety for whom?" "For residents," he said. "Proud to locate that noun." "Riversets like Mr. Galante?" counsel asked, letting the name arrive like a breeze that changes a room's temperature. Silence, the instructive kind. The deputy found the water again. "We do not coordinate with," he began, and stopped because the available endings were all bad. The fixer adjusted his cuff. Our detective watched the neat wrist and thought about words. The committee chair leaned into his microphone. "Deputy Director, the city will always perform maintenance. It will not underwrite choreography for unaliving. If your framework became a dance card, you will say so here." The deputy's face did that thing faces do when the future adjusts itself by half an inch. He didn't confess. He did the next best thing. "We allowed liaisons too much discretion," he said. "The framework was exploited." "By whom?" "By those who—" he began and again found a cliff. "By those who do not share our values." "Names?" He glanced at the fixer. The fixer was a statue of plausible deniability. "Names," the chair repeated. The deputy gave 2 landings names, the ones the kid had given. He added a third that made the reporter flinch in professional excitement, a scheduler in the council office with a talent for placing things on calendars and a brother who liked choir snacks. The room made a sound that polite rooms make, paper moving, breath caught. After the hearing, the detective walked out to the steps where weather can hear itself. The reporter joined him, phone buzzing like a festival. "He gave you the landing," she said. "You going to Clove?" "I'm going to measure the stair," he said. "Upstairs still says they were in a different building," she said. "That's fine," he said. "We're renovating the landing." He had no illusions. Upstairs continued. Upstairs always continues, but downstairs hinge, the door, the street, could be made honest for a while. Sometimes that's how cities define victory, not permanent, but repeatable. He took the afternoon to do something unfashionable in investigations, he said. Thank you. He stopped by the technician's desk with a pastry that had earned it. He emailed the hygienic staffer a note that wasn't evidence but mattered. He went to Joe and Mary's and tipped with a generosity that felt like an argument. How's the door? He asked. Ritual's echo? It squeaks when it should, the owner said. It's developed taste. Same, the detective said. The fixer called at dusk. You got your names, he said. I got the landing, the detective said. You won't get upstairs, the fixer said, taunting. They live in the weather. I live near the door, the detective said. A pause that felt like two men respecting their jobs from opposite directions. Detective, the fixer said, I didn't conduct this. You know that. I know you kept Ty, the detective said. Time is a kindness, the fixer said. To whom, the detective asked, is the question. They let the line go quiet and didn't ruin it with agreement. Night settled in the way New York does it, as a negotiation. The clubs were quieter. Choir practice discovered calendars with fewer Thursdays. The charity announced a review of vendor practices and retired door services with thanks for their commitment to access. The cat kept the P.O. box and decided to trust no one. On a stoop, the kid with the watch smoked one less. He had taken a job moving chairs at a place that hosted weddings. He said the pay was worse and the schedule honest. He said the music was loud but predictable. Progress, in this town, is sometimes a different kind of noise. The three polite men from the borrowed apartment read the weather report in separate places. One practiced a new route to a new door in a new neighborhood where the hinges hadn't learned his name. One considered buying a ticket to somewhere that had never heard of choir practice. One decided to wait and see, because patience had paid before. Our detective stood at his window, brick, a strip of sky, somebody's laundry practicing surrender, and let himself feel something like satisfaction, with a side of realism. He wrote on an index card and pinned it on his board where it would annoy future him with its earnestness. Make it harder to do the next one. He thought about landings, about clipboards, about the way cities survive by persuading themselves they can be improved by increments. He thought about a door that squeaked like a citizen. Before bed, he walked to Joe and Mary's to return the coffee mug he'd accidentally kept on a day the world was heavier. The owner accepted it like a sacrament. They didn't say we're good, they were. The street exhaled again, not dramatically, just enough to register. A bus sighed. A hydrant cooled a dog with poor judgment. Somewhere the saxophone argued for 1958 and lost with dignity. Tomorrow would bring lawyers, statements, editorials, and an email from someone upstairs expressing shock that stairs exist. The detective would testify, politely. The fixer would sit 2 rows back, politely. The city would nod as if it had learned something, politely. But tonight in Bushwick, a hinge chose to complain on schedule, and sometimes that's enough music for a block. In New York, a win is measured in inches. You don't conquer the city, you negotiate with it. You don't change everything, you move the furniture enough so that the next person doesn't stub their toe as hard. The detective woke knowing today was an inch-moving day. He dressed for testimony the way a man dresses for weather, appropriately and without delusion. The suit had attended hearings where people remembered selectively and forgot professionally. He tied the tie with the calm of a man who had learned to respect gravity's opinions. On the board, the threads had become lines. Door services retired with a fulsome thank you. the charity cooperating with zeal edged in self-preservation. The council office, discovering the difference between scheduling and choreography. The landing, on the record, blinking in fluorescent light. The upstairs continuing as upstairs does, but with new caution carved into its calendar. He added one last note at the corner. Last inch honest door. He underlined it. He didn't regret underlining it. At the municipal building, the hearing room had acquired a personality. Staffers moved papers with purpose. Reporters carried the day like groceries. Residents, ones who had decided governing was a spectator sport, took their same seats, arranged their same snacks, and greeted each other like gym regulars. The fixer sat 2 rows back, neat wrist hidden, expression set to diplomacy. When the detective's name was called, he walked to the table and raised his hand, like a man who believed in the concept of oaths, if for the execution. He sat. The microphone hum became a presence. Counsel smiled the way a surgeon smiles at a rivet. Detective Counsel said, "Please describe in simple terms how a door squeak became a case." He did. The courtesy, the graphite, the truck, the curb, the framework, the choir. He explained how quality of life functioned as a blanket under which anything could nap, including choreography. He explained how permission layered upon permission produces secrecy by volume, not by shadow. He kept the tone calm, he kept the sarcasm dry. He used Unalive because language has schedules too. He did not name gods, he named schedules. "Did you find evidence that the city explicitly coordinated violence?" Counsel asked. "No," he said, "because accuracy is a tool. We found a system that could be steered by men who needed doors to behave." "And did it behave for them?" he said, "once." "And no. Now it squeaks," he said. There was a murmur, small, respectful. The room liked metaphors when they earned it. The committee chair asked about reforms. He offered 3 inches public logs for curb occupancy requests, independent review for access improvements, an end to unnamed liaisons moving trucks like chess pieces. He recommended Tibes windows friendly to residents and hostile to choreography. He suggested graphite purchases to be treated like fireworks, legal, reported, seasonal. "You want to regulate graphite," a member said, smiling. "I want to regulate courtesy," he said. "Courtesy used like camouflage." The reporter's pen approved. They asked about names. He gave the landing, already on the record, and declined to aim at upstairs rumours. He knew the limits of microphones and the appetite of weather. After, in the hallway with the honest light, the fixer stepped close enough to borrow the same air. "You were generous," he said. "I was precise," the detective said. "Precision is a kind of mercy," the fixer said. "Depend on the cut," the detective said. They stood for a moment, 2 men who occupied different jobs in the same city, exchanging verbs without witnesses. Then the fixer nodded once and left, walking like a man who understood that calendars are political creatures. Outside, the city tested autumn a few weeks early. A breeze lifted menus. A ladder leaned against a building for an honest reason. Someone walked a dog who had opinions about pigeons, and none about policy. The detective allowed himself a small exhale, and then did something unfashionable for a main character. He went to return things. He brought the graphite tin back to the club off Lorimer and set it on the shelf labelled door. Sal watched with a face built for disclaimers. "You keep souvenirs?" Sal asked. "Only when they're instruments," the detective said. Sal nodded, a concession in the language of landings. "We're doing a picnic," he said, "which in club means we will now be publicly harmless for 3 weeks." Potato and macaronin, the detective said. Unity, Sal said deadpan. He stopped next at the Charity Council, received him with hydrating earnestness. We're implementing pre-clearance for all alley work, Council said. We're funding door repairs with squeak-positive outcomes. Doors that tell you they're doors, Council said, almost smiling. Put that on the banner, the detective said. He walked past the council office, where a staffer with civic hygiene stared into a monitor like it owed him a future. He left a sticky note. Thank you for tidiness. It was not evidence, it mattered. The young man with the too confident watch had traded it for a wrist with a tan line and a new job moving chairs for weddings. The detective found him loading a van with white folding optimism. How's the hymn? The detective asked. Louder, the kid said. But at least it's the same song for everyone in the room. He looked healthier in the way that sleep is a vitamin. You didn't take down upstairs. Wasn't the job, the detective said. What's the due, people? Make it harder to do the next one, the detective said. The kid nodded like a person being handed a small heavy object. I can lift that, he said. At Joe and Mary's, lunch performed its ritual. Regulars, new faces, the back corner table reclaimed by daily life. The radio murmured baseball and mercy. The owner moved with a lightness that had taken a month to engineer. The door offered its squeak at key moments, entrances, exits, a kitchen kid sneaking a cookie. The room applauded it with casual affection. The detective took his usual stool. The server set down coffee and a plate that had not asked permission to arrive. He raised his cup toward the hinge out of respect for small victories. How's the door? He asked. Ritual intact. Fluent, the owner said. Speak squeak and English. They shared a small, unremarkable laugh. Most expensive kind in this line of work. The reporter slid into the neighbouring stool like a recurring character who had earned it. Headline, she said. City adds brakes to maintenance. Choir loses room. Quality of life discovers commas. You'll bury that third line halfway down, he said. Of course, she said. But the people who read to the middle deserve a treat. They ate. They talked about nothing important and everything adjacent. She asked if he'd ever write a book. He said he already did, on index cards and corkboard, the only addition that mattered. She said that was the most detective thing anyone had said to her this month. He accepted the trophy. When he left, he walked past the back door and laid his hand on it. The hinge offered a ceremonial complaint. Good, he said, and the door, being a door, said nothing profound. The three polite men, those who had rehearsed the alley into cooperation, were now weather. One had left for a city where doors are taller and fewer people know your name. One had found work unrelated to hinges but adjacent to exits. One continued in place because inertia is a credential. They would not be famous. Fame is upstairs. They would be footnotes. Footnotes are forever if you know where to look. The fixer remained the city's neatest wrist. He adjusted his calendar to include longer pauses between verbs. He offered a donation to a scholarship fund for kids who want to fix doors in ways that do not require euphemism. He emailed the detective one sentence. We moved an inch. The detective replied, Make it 2. Paper closed its migration for the day. Permits nested. Emails slept in their sent folders. A city clerk filed a form that would keep a truck from blocking an alley for no stated reason. Somewhere in a different room, a different committee tried a different phrase and decided it liked the way Sunlight Review sounded. Small changes, multiplied. That's policy, on a good day. He ended where all decent days in this story end, by the window with the stingy sky. He looked at the board and saw less drama and more structure. Names that had mattered, now taped at their edges, useful and finite. He took down one string and moved a pushpin and allowed himself the stern gift of closure without absolution. On the desk an index card waited for a verdict. He wrote, "The last inch is local." Then, underneath, smaller, "Keep it squeaking." He turned out the light. The city kept its own. Buses exhaled. A hydrant rehearsed October. From a window somewhere, a saxophone tried again to convince a night that 1958 was the correct answer, and the night, as always, disagreed politely. New York did what it does best. It kept the story going and left the door not quite closed. Just enough air, just enough music.